How does mindfulness meditation fit in with grief? Sometimes the grief and sadness feels too overwhelming to sit with. Yes, absolutely. And so if it feels too overwhelming to sit with, then you have always have the option to do something else about it. Sometimes other things are useful. I find going for long walks for me is useful for these difficult emotions. It allows kind of and then I find it easier to be mindful in a good way of the difficult emotions by walking, because it kind of gives some freedom to the energy, the sensations, the feelings of the emotion to course through my body when I'm walking. And I let my mind just think what it does. But I try to come back and just check in, make room for it. I try to be present. But when I'm walking, it's not like the stakes are not as high as meditation or something. And so it's just kind of a freer and easier way to go. The body's helping, grounding, and supportive. So that's also an option. Another option is, in fact, to bring more mindfulness to the grief and the sadness, and to see this as an opportunity to learn a different relationship to grief and sadness than we normally have. So, for example, sometimes when people feel grief and feel sadness, there can be a very strong identification to it, or a very strong attitude with it, that this is unfortunate, poor me, this is too much, why is this happening to me? I'll never overcome it. This is forever. This is too difficult for me. All these thoughts and attitudes come in, which kind of make it they're extra. They're not the grief themselves. They are how we're relating to the grief. And this difference between a simple or pure but difficult emotion for what it is in and of itself versus how we're relating to it is one of the really important ways in which we tease apart. Remember the RAFT acronym? We're teasing apart so that the thoughts about something, the attitude towards something, is different than the something. And so there is something that, to quote Charlie Brown, good grief. There is good grief. There is a way. Grief is a completely normal and even healthy human emotion to have. So is sadness. It's not a mistake to feel these things. It might be part of the heart's movement towards healing, movement back to being whole. It might be part of the very important process by which we come to balance, we learn, we grow, we develop. It might even be an important part of how we honor or respect the profundity of what's been lost, the profundity of what's happening to us. So grief doesn't have to be a problem or seen as a problem. And a lot of the way in which it's seen as a problem tends to be on the side of our relationship to it. What we've learned about grief from our society and our family. People tell us you should be over it by now. And we're embarrassed by it, or we're frightened by it, or, all kinds of So you might kind of use the mindfulness to see if you can distinguish between the simplicity of grief that can be quite strong versus your relationship to it, your attitude towards, your resistance to it, your fear of it. And if you can separate those two out, then if it feels okay for you, then if you can come into your body and just relax and open up and let the grief and the sadness just kind of move through you freely. And if what that means is you start crying, let yourself cry. Be mindful of tears. But the art of crying and letting the freedom of the grief to be there, that is really interesting to do that and valuable to do it in meditation, where this is where taking a good meditation posture, where you sit upright and alert, can be invaluable, because a balanced upright posture can help us stay balanced in letting these energies move through us freely. And then we pay attention to our posture, because some of the more unhelpful ways to be with these difficult emotions is to physically collapse, to kind of, even physically kind of, oh no, and this is so hard, and kind of physically the posture kind of collapses. To do that is a little bit leaning into it, and in fact kind of feeds it a little bit. There's something very powerful and very respectful of the emotion to not collapse or give into it that way, but keep the posture balanced and open, trusting the body, and what happens in the body is the body goes through it.